Our topic is the Heart Sutra, and out of the three lengths of the Buddha's teachings, extensive, middling, and short, it's one of the shorter, pithier sutras, and therefore it's called the Heart Sutra. So in some treatises, it's presented as a sutra of the view, because that's its principal topic. So some sutras principally teach emptiness as their explicit topic, and others teach the hidden meaning, which is the stages of realization, which would teach the 5 paths and the 10 grounds. So out of these two different types of sutras, the Heart Sutra is one that explicitly and principally teaches emptiness, but implicitly or on the side also teaches the hidden meaning, which is the stages of realization. So within the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, there are those that are extensive, middling, and short, right? There are many Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So the extensive would be the Perfection of Wisdom in 100,000 lines. The middling is posited as the Perfection of Wisdom in 20,000 lines, and the short is the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 lines. But there's not only three, right? Within the extensive, there is the middling extensive and the extensive extensive, and likewise the extensive middling and middling middling, right? There's many different lengths of Perfection of Wisdom sutras. And therefore, the Heart Sutra would be the abbreviated of the abbreviated, right? The short of the short, because it's comparative to the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 lines, right? It's much shorter than that. So it's the short of the short. But although it has few words, its topics are still vast, right? It indicates the path from the path of accumulation right up to Buddhahood. So then you also have Perfection of Wisdom Sutras of 300 lines, 500 lines. That of 300 lines would be the Vajrakata. You even have Perfection of Wisdom Sutras that are shorter than the Heart Sutra. So the shortest is the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra having one syllable. That syllable is a. And so on and so forth. So all these different lengths of Perfection of Wisdom Sutras were taught because there are differing or different disciples having different dispositions and inclinations. So the Perfection of Wisdom in 100,000 lines is said to be taught to disciples of dull faculties because they need more extensive explanations to get the point. And then the middling for middling faculties, and then those shorter sutras like the Heart Sutras are said to be for disciples of sharp faculties, right? That based upon the Heart Sutra alone, they could listen to it, contemplate it, and meditate on it and achieve Buddhahood. So I believe we've already covered the part of the commentary that talks about the name of the Heart Sutra, and also the reason for stating at the start of the sutra the title of it in its Indic language. So it's important to do this at the beginning of sutras, right? Now there are thousands of languages that a sutra could be translated into, but at the time of the Buddha, there were only said to be 4 main languages that the Dharma was taught in. So, for example, Sanskrit, Apabhramsha, and so on and so forth. We don't need to go into all of them. Sanskrit, however, was the language into which most of the Buddha's teachings were set down. And therefore, the reason for giving the Sanskrit title at the start is 1, to place imprints in our continuum, 2, to bless our continuum, and 3, to show that this text has an authoritative source. Right? This translation that we're reading actually came from an authoritative Sanskrit source. So the Buddha was the 4th Buddha of this world system out of the 1,000 that are to come and have already come. The next is, of course, Buddha Maitreya. And it is said that all of these 1,000 Buddhas of this world system will turn the wheel of Dharma in the Sanskrit language. So that being the case, we do require blessings in order to receive such teaching. So that's an important reason to give the title in Sanskrit at the start of each sutra. And then, of course, the third, to show that it has an authoritative source, right? So although we read this in English or whichever language, we can say, oh, this actually came from India, which is where all the authoritative teachings originated, and it can give us confidence. Uh, some sutras, however, are also started with the lines in the Chinese language and so forth, so not all are translated from Sanskrit. So the Buddha is said to have taught everything in Sanskrit or Pali language, but some scholars assert that what we call Pali is actually the Magadha language of central India, and it was just later scholars that imputed this with the name Pali, but actually the teachings were just given in this Magadha language. So we can say fundamentally that the Heart Sutra is a teaching of the Buddha, but there is still doubt as to which person or being compiled this teaching and presented it as it is canonized, and we read it now. So whether that was Manjushri, Ananda, or Vajrapani is a basis for doubt. It actually doesn't really matter when it comes down to the practice of the Heart Sutra, whether it was compiled by Manjushri or Vajrapani, who were high-level bodhisattvas, or Ananda, who was a Hira Arhat. It doesn't make a difference, does it? And then, of course, even though that doesn't matter, there's still another doubt that comes up with respect to the compiling of this teaching. So the teachings were compiled after the Buddha passed away, right? During his lifetime, they were not written down, they were simply memorized. And then at the convening of the first council, the 500 Arhats presented from memory the teachings that they were present for. And we know that Ananda was the compiler principally of the general sutra section, Upali of the Vinaya section, and Kashyapa of the Abhidharma section, which includes all perfection of wisdom sutras. So if the Heart Sutra falls into the category of Abhidharma, right, higher knowledge, wouldn't one therefore assume that Kashyapa compiled this teaching? So this general presentation of Kashyapa being the compiler of the Abhidharma section, Upali of the Vinaya, and Ananda of the Sutra section is actually a general presentation of the compilation of the teachings. From the perspective of the compilation of uncommon teachings, right, unshared, the Bodhisattva treatises and likewise Tantric treatises were said to be compiled by others like Vajrapani, Chenrezig, or Avalokiteshvara, Maitreya, and so forth. So the great master Haribhadra, who was the famous commentator on Maitreya's Ornament for Clear Realization, right, a bodhisattva himself, states that the Heart Sutra was compiled by Ananda, and it's clear, according to other sutras, that the Buddha blessed him and he was there to receive the teachings. Bhava Viveka, another Indian master, states it's not Ananda who compiled the teachings because he was a hearer, at least according to the general presentation. And therefore, he couldn't have heard any perfection of wisdom sutra because they are not for the ears of hearers, right? They were not heard, contemplated, or meditated on by the hearers. And therefore, the compiler of the Heart Sutra was Vajrapani. So Baba Viveka says it's Vajrapani, not Ananda, and Haribhadra, who asserts it's Ananda, basically answers Baba Viveka by saying, although Ananda was not capable of doing so himself, he compiled the sutras through the blessing of the Buddha and therefore is the compiler of the Perfection of Wisdom sutras. So the Heart Sutra is a Mahayana sutra, and therefore another question arises as to whether it teaches the paths of beings of smaller, middling, and greater scope. So does it teach the paths that are shared with beings of smaller capacity? Does it teach the paths that are shared with beings of middling capacity or scope? Of course, it teaches the paths of greater scope. So If we do assert that it does teach the stages of realization, it would seem satisfactory to assert that it teaches the paths in common with beings of all three scopes. Well, if you say that no, it actually doesn't teach the stages of the paths of all three types of persons, right, of smaller, middling, and greater scope, well, you would at the very least assert that the intended disciple of this text is a Mahayana practitioner, correct? Well, if the intended disciple is a Mahayana practitioner, does a Mahayana practitioner need to train in the topics that are shared with the persons of lower scope, such as the Four Noble Truths, the close placements of mindfulness, and so on and so forth? I think it's suitable to say that yes, it does teach the stages of the path of all three practitioners. One can say it teaches the Four Noble Truths, the 12 links of dependent origination, the path of accumulation, preparation, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we've gone through the name of the text. So now we're up to the part in the commentary that discusses the nidana, or the setting of the scene. So this has traditionally two parts to it, a common setting of the scene and a unique setting of the scene. So this generally indicates the place the sutra was taught, what's being taught, who was there, and so on and so forth. So whatever Buddhist sutra it is, it should have a common setting of the scene, which is usually the words, "Thus I've heard at one time, the Buddha was at Rajagriha, for example, with a great assembly of this or that many monks," and so on and so forth. And therefore, this sutra too starts with, "Thus did I hear at one time." So if we look at this sentence in a little bit more detail, thus I heard, right? So thus this teaching, I, the compiler. So if we take the compiler of this teaching to be Manjushri, so thus I, Manjushri, have heard. And I heard being meaning that I heard it, or he heard it, from Buddha Shakyamuni directly, not from a third person, but he was present there himself and heard it directly. At one time is traditionally explained to mean that the compiler heard it once. This teaching was not given multiple times. Right, so that indicates the excellent time. And the excellent teacher is, of course, Buddha Shakyamuni, the Bhagawan. And Bhagawan translated into Tibetan is Jomdinde, Jom meaning destroyed, so the destruction of afflictions, Den meaning to possess, so as to possess all knowledge. So the Blessed One was staying in Rajagriha at Vulture's Peak. So this indicates the perfect place. So the perfect place is Rajagriha. So a lot of you have been on pilgrimage, so you would have actually been to this place. You've probably walked up Vulture's Peak. Rajagriha was an ancient city in the vicinity of Vulture's Peak, right? So they're separate places. And this Vulture's Peak, this mountain near Rajagriha, was the place of all the teachings of the second turning of the wheel of characteristiclessness. So Vulture's Peak, as many of you would know, is actually quite a small place. It doesn't seem like it could fit many people. And thus, this is where we talk about pure karma and pure appearances. Right? Because when the Buddha taught the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras on this mountain, it is said that thousands of monks were present. So, for example, when the great sixth or seventh Dalai Lama Tsangyan Gyatso went on pilgrimage to Vulture's Peak, he saw that there was really no place to walk there, right? It's quite small. At the same time, due to his pure karma, he saw volumes of scriptures stacked high in the sky on top of it. I think that's what Geshe said. I'm not 100% sure. So there are a lot of stories about this Vulture's Peak, but we don't have time to go into all of them. Next, we move on to the perfect assembly. So here that is described as a great assembly of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. So two separate assemblies. So this is to indicate that there was a human assembly because a fully ordained bhikshu must be a human being. And a bodhisattva assembly is to indicate that there were non-humans present. So the gods and asuras who were, listening from the sky, so to speak, um, that they were also present. So with respect to this assembly of bhikshus or monks, then Lharampa takes them to all be arhats. So when such a sutra talks of an assembly of monks, it's talking about an assembly of monks who are arhats. And then Lharampa says in his commentary regarding the word monk, the actuality of monkhood can be attained by any of the 10 ways of receiving ordination. In this context, it refers to an arhat. As Shantideva says in his Bodhisattva's Way, in chapter 9, verse 45, monkhood is the root of the teaching, but even monkhood is difficult. So the Sangha is a gathering of 4 or more monks, and so on and so forth. So here, monkhood being difficult means that it is difficult even for a fully ordained monk to achieve arhatship. So we see that there are 2 great assemblies. So the word great is used 2 times, but it doesn't mean the same thing each time. The first time it talks about a great assembly of monks, it's actually talking about a great number of monks. So for example, here um, there's probably 1,000 or so. In the perfection of wisdom of 8,000 lines, there were 250, I think. Let me just ask. Geshe Gaden ba nala ni changa katsu shaore yibgyeong na chu shaore.
다 장가 담에도 다 가실은 망보시 용도로.
Less. Okay.
네.
So there are varying numbers given throughout the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras about how many monks were present for each teaching. Okay, so with respect to the second iteration of the word great, this, if I'm following correctly, this is referring to the bodhisattvas themselves, right? And in particular, with respect to the word bodhi and bodhisattva, which indicates a purification of all afflictions and a perfection of all qualities. So in that sense, they're great. So bodhisattva is explained many times in such texts as the Vairochana Abhisambodhi and so forth. The simple etymology is that because they have purified all faults and accomplished all qualities, they are called bodhi, and because they contemplate the welfare of all transmigrators and have annihilated the demons, they are sattva. Okay, to continue reading Lharampa, I'm honestly getting a bit lost. Or because they have studied the 2 truths again and again and have arrived at the meaning of them, they are called bodhi, and because they have endured hardship in contemplating the 2 truths again and again, they are called sattva, but it doesn't seem to be what Geshe was just reading. I'm getting lost in all these commentaries that we are looking at, sorry. Okay, so the Blessed One was staying there together with a great assembly and a great community. So together with means behavior or activity and means concordant. In brief, it means that the audience was of concordant activity. Abide has the 4 meanings: abide in physical posture, abide in the teaching of the doctrine, abide in samadhi, and abide in correctly residing within. In this case, it's abiding in a physical posture. Okay, so maybe our Heart Sutra translation doesn't exactly translate the terms as you find them in this commentary. Thus. Right, so they were abiding together. And as just said, abiding can be any manner of abiding, usually posited in 4 ways. So abiding in physical posture and so on and so forth. And in this case of this sutra, they were abiding together in physical posture. So physical posture refers to physical movement of going, staying, sleeping, and so on and so forth. So that concludes the common prologue or setting of the scene. So whether this is actually the words of the Buddha, I mean, probably not. It's the words of the compiler, isn't it? As we have discussed. So we could say these are Manjushri's words. Then we move on to the unique prologue or unique setting of the scene. And this starts with the words, at that time, the transcendent victor or the blessed one was absorbed in a samadhi on the categories of phenomena called perception of the profound. So what are the words of, what does this name of this samadhi even mean? So To unpack it a bit, we have perception of the profound. So the profound is emptiness. The perception of that is a pristine wisdom which realizes that. And the categories of phenomena refers to the emptiness that exists with all phenomena that exist. So, although I just said that perception of the profound refers to a pristine wisdom realizing emptiness, there are other scholars who interpret this word perception in particular to be an appearance of conventional phenomena, in the sense that within the realization of emptiness, one could also perceive conventional phenomena. So, at that point, indicating the relationship between emptiness and dependent origination. The categories of phenomena, which we said are basically all phenomena, can be divided into 51 categories or 59, depending how you enumerate the famous categories such as the 5 aggregates, the 18 constituents, and so on and so forth, which of course do come later in the Heart Sutra itself, so we won't go into those now. This meditative stabilization or samadhi on such things refers to a calm abiding, which is single-pointedly focused on emptiness. So at that time, with respect to Dendal Lharamba's commentary, means at the time of the teaching, the doctrine, at the time of teaching the doctrine when the roots of virtue of the audience had ripened. So at that particular time when the audience was ripe for such a teaching. And what follows is essentially a discussion of, or a question and answer inspired by the blessings of the Buddha, in which Avalokiteshvara is the main speaker. So Shariputra asks the questions and Avalokiteshvara answers them. So therefore, this sutra is essentially the word of the Buddha, but the word of the Buddha spoken by another or inspired by the Buddha due to his blessings or assented to by the Buddha.
나산이 좀 내데 띵인들라 뇽바리 슈데깔라 양 테시스.
Also at that time, it says, and this is a term of emphasis, meaning at that very time at which the disciples' continua were ripe, according to Dendal Lharampa. So at the time, the Buddha was in equipoise on that samadhi, but Avalokiteshvara was not. We probably wouldn't say he was in equipoise, but rather he was using discriminating analysis to investigate the meaning of emptiness. So here, Avalokiteshvara is not just referred to as a bodhisattva, but also a mahasattva. So why this extra level of qualification? So bodhisattva, as we know, refers to bodhi being enlightenment. Sattva, we can determine, refers to the presence of conventional bodhicitta. But this mahasattva is a term that's given to Avalokiteshvara here because he is an Arya being, and therefore it indicates that he has ultimate bodhicitta, so a direct realization of emptiness. So Avalokiteshvara has risen far above the level of common beings and has the power to free from suffering all sentient beings who can be seen by his eyes. So that's sort of a word commentary on his name itself, right? The superior Avalokiteshvara. He looks down on the suffering of beings, and through his quality, he has the power to liberate them from that suffering. So at this time, when he was practicing the profound perfection, he is in a state of observation of emptiness. So he is analyzing the emptiness of inherent nature. So just based on the name itself, the Arya Avalokiteshvara, it shows that he has all 3 types of qualities of knowledge, love, and power. So Arya indicates that he has the quality of knowledge, right? Because it indicates he has ultimate bodhicitta, a direct realization of emptiness. Avalokiteshvara, the Avalokitesh part, I suppose, the Chenrezig part, indicates that he has the nature of love, right? It's an emphasis on him looking down on the suffering of others. right? Avalokita. Yeah, right. Avalokita means to look down upon. And then Ishwara, which is the second part of his name, Wangchuk in Tibetan, indicates his power of love, right? So the word also in the phrase, these five aggregates also are empty, indicates that just as it indicates that not only are the five aggregates empty of true existence or existence from their own side, but likewise the 18 constituents and so forth that come later are too empty from inherent existence, true existence, existence from their own side. So the Heart Sutra's main focus being that of emptiness, it starts with the five aggregates too are empty of inherent existence. So here, emptiness is that emptiness of in which something is dependently arisen, right? According to the Prasangika view, it is that emptiness of inherent existence, wherein an existent is a mere name, a mere designation. And because something is empty, it is a dependent origination, and because it is a dependent origination, it is empty, right? So this is the emptiness that it is teaching us. So dependent origination itself has three levels of subtlety. The first is the dependent origination of cause and effect. The second is the dependent origination of depending on its parts. And the third is the dependent origination of it being a mere name and an imputed phenomena. So starting with the first, the dependent origination of cause and effect, that is the dependent origination of all functioning things, right? All impermanent things being arisen from their causes. All phenomena are empty of true existence, but their conventional existence is still tenable, right? They exist conventionally. Because something is empty of true existence does not necessitate that it disappears or ceases to exist. So, although all things are empty of inherent existence or existence from their own side, it is still tenable that we walk, we eat, we drink, and so forth. And this is because when you do not analyze and look for the designated thing, you can
맞는
say
얘기하면
that
아니,
when
로스
you do
로스다.
not analyze and look for the designated thing, you can say that we come, we go, we eat, and so forth. But when you start to look for it, when you search for the designated thing, you do not find it anymore. And this is because it lacks true existence. So, what about how things appear? Well, things appear to us as truly existent, but their reality or mode of existence is empty of true existence. So there is a disparity between how things appear and how they actually exist. And we are trapped in our endless cycling because we do not recognize this, because of the disparity between how things appear and how they exist. So a flower, for example, definitely appears to all of us as 100% existing from its own side, although its reality is that it does not exist from its own side at all, right? It does not exist from its own side at all because it is completely dependent upon its parts, and it came into existence in dependence upon its causes. If a flower, for example, were truly existent, it would have to be self-supporting. It would not depend on those at all to exist. And that is the presentation of the Prasangika Madhyamaka view. And Geshe just realized that he hadn't set aside any time for meditation, which is really sweet. So he interrupted himself mid-sentence, but all phenomena do not exist from their own side, and this is
음,
because they are mutually dependent. So the object of negation, of mutual dependence, is existing by way of its own side. So we're actually going to perform some placement meditation on emptiness right now rather than analytical meditation. So keeping the thought that things do not exist from their own side at all, even a single atom from their own side. Your object within this meditation will just simply be emptiness, right? Emptiness itself, right? The object of negation is not existing from its own side. So what should appear to you is simply emptiness. And we're not going to analyze it in this meditation. Just try and hold on to that uh, object, which is emptiness. Buddha Shakyamuni laid great emphasis on that which was called emptiness. And if emptiness itself were not so profound, the wisdom realizing it would also likewise not be profound. Just like in a normal situation, we deem knowledge of a very difficult topic to be a superior knowledge. That emptiness needs to be realized in order to be liberated from cyclic existence is actually a unique position of the Madhyamaka Prasangika school of thought. The mind-only school of thought and so forth assert that one does not actually need to realize emptiness to be merely liberated from cyclic existence. It is enough to realize the 16 aspects of this Four Noble Truths, such as impermanence and so forth. So Shantideva, in his Bodhisattva's Way of Life, presents the argument from the lower tenet systems, in which they say, through seeing the truth, one is liberated. So what need is there to see emptiness? And the reply to that from the Prasangika point of view is that in scripture it says that without this path there is no enlightenment. And the meaning of that is that without this path, which is a wisdom realizing emptiness, there is no enlightenment of the three, which is hearers, solitary realizers, and bodhisattvas. So we've covered the presentation of the name of the text, the translator's homage, the common and unique setting of the scene, and now we get to the main body of the text, where Shariputra asks the question and Avalokiteshvara answers. So with respect to how this is commented on within this question and answer, the answer comprises an answer to beings of dull faculties. So it's an answer relating to the path of accumulation and preparation, and then an answer for beings of sharper faculties. So it gives the answer in terms of what is perceived on the path of seeing, path of meditation, and the path of no more learning. So it says, thereupon, through the Buddha's inspiration, or through the blessings of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra spoke thus to the noble Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva, the great being. So by the blessings of the Buddha, here is said because from a common or shared perspective, Shariputra presents as this hero disciple. According to Chandrakirti in his illuminating lamp, he says that Shariputra is actually an emanation of Dripakunsa. Dripakunsa, I believe, is Sarva Nivarana Vishkambin. Out of the 8 close disciples, is it? Okay, I'm not sure if it's Sarva Nivarana Vishkambin, but anyway. Anyway, he's more than just a regular hero disciple, according to Chandrakirti. Sorry, I don't have the exact name that he's supposed to be an emanation of. Los.
that is what they think. That is
Oh, it actually is. Sorry, I just see it in Lharampa's commentary now that it's, yeah, he's an emanation of the Bodhisattva, Sarva Nivarana Vishkamin. Okay, so we'll leave it there for now. Do you have any questions?